Hello, everybody. Oops. Yeah. I won't shout. Anyway, it's nice to know that the average age group here is much younger than the session on traditional documentaries. I'm just going to introduce the chair, but I want to thank everybody who comes from France, Holland, London, and America to be here for you today. John Farron is the creative director of 360 Production based in London and Derry, Northern Ireland. John has made content for most of the world's leading broadcasters. He has produced great history shows in formats such as James May, Things You Need to Know for BBC Two and Discovery, Len Goodman's Titanic for BBC, PBS, and NHK, Making History for National Geographic, US and International, and many other broadcasters. I've known John for about 15, 20 years, I think. His digital clients include Yahoo, YouTube, the EU, I think that's very glamorous, and Bell Media. And John was previously the editor of BBC history flagship Time Watch. Enjoy.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. So just a couple of pieces of housekeeping. We have an artist at the back sketching this session, his impressions of this sketching. And at the end, we will also be interpreting the session in mime and dance. So at the end of the session, please do go and have a look at what the artist has come up with. If you want to ask a question, that would be really, really good. Please wait for the mic, because we're trying to capture this event for posterity. So it's a session on interactive docs, so we kind of quite like to make it interactive. So if you've got a question, put your hand up. I'll note you. I might not come to you immediately, but I'll try and come to you during the session. So let's not kind of wait for the end and then have a sort of awkward 15-minute Q&A. If anyone says anything that you don't understand or you've got a good question, ask the question. It's an interactive documentary experience. So it'll be bespoke for all of you, obviously. There'll be alternative endings which you'll be able to choose. There'll be a second screen experience. And we're going to start by asking the panelists to introduce themselves, talk a little bit about what they're doing and what interactive documentary means to them. And we're going to kind of go around 3 times in the same order. So going first is Marianne.
Hello, I'm Marianne Levy-Leblond. I work within the Arte France web department in Paris. I'm in charge of coordinating interactive productions there. Briefly, Arte is a TV channel broadcasting in France and Germany and has offices in Paris and Germany and Strasbourg. The French part brings roughly half of the programming of the channel, and the channel has developed a strategy for the last, I'd say, 5-6 years of expanding online, both in terms of marketing its TV programs, in terms of distribution of its TV programs, and also in terms of supporting and co-producing creation on these new platforms. This is really a way of going further with the initial remit of the channel, of supporting creation and culture. So the interactive production is generally seen as a central mission of the channel. It raises also a number of questions of organization, which I share with a number of my colleagues in broadcasting corporations, whether you start from separate teams on TV and on the online departments, and then you go towards trying to mix them. So that's one of the issues we face at the moment in Arte. About what interactive documentary means to me, I just want to say that we're not only producing interactive documentary, but also fiction and any genre. And coming from a TV background myself, something I found in interactive production is that you at last can leave labels behind you. So I wouldn't insist on what documentary is versus fiction or whatever, on what interactive means versus linear. All these are different dimensions of creation.
Thank you. Adu.
Hi, I'm I'm Adam G. I'm a multi-platform commissioner at Channel 4 for features and faction entertainment. The kind of stuff that I've commissioned over the last couple of years include things like Hugh's Fish Fight, Great British Property Scandal, Embarrassing Bodies, Jamie's School Dinners and Jamie's Dream School, One Born Every Minute, and forthcoming is something called Was It Something I Said, which maybe I'll have a chance to talk about later. I'm mainly interested in pursuing a course of creating fully integrated multi-platform or transmedia productions whereby the TV is a lesser beast without the digital and vice versa. And I guess for me the main thing about interactive documentary and what that might mean is that I think it's really important that the interaction is meaningful, so sort of clicking to advance through content is not meaningful. Clicking to access content can often just be on-demand distribution. I'm interested in interactive documentary as a medium in its own right. And the other thing that is really critical to me is rewarding interaction. I think that's the absolute key to it.
Thank you very much. Femke, I think, next.
Hi, my name is Femke Wolting. I'm director of Submarine, an Amsterdam-based production studio. We do a combination of film, animation, and interactive production. We started about 12 years ago, and at the time we wanted to combine our love for film and storytelling with using new technologies. So over the last decade, we've done a lot of interactive in both linear film production. When we started out, it was very hard still to work with broadcasters for interactive productions because there was no budget for, sometimes there were not even interactive departments yet. So we decided to create our own channel, which became kind of a sub-company. It's a non-profit called submarinechannel.com. And with this we do more experimental and innovative experiments in terms of storytelling. So we've done interactive fiction, documentary. And what I love about interactive documentary is that it's still so free in genre and format, that they're you can make them from very linear to highly interactive. You can have a huge role of the audience in terms of participating or contributing or less so. And I like the freedom of all these dimensions that you can use to create new kinds of stories.
You said it was difficult financially 12 years ago. Has it got easier in Holland?
Well, yes and no. I think that certain things have gotten easier. I think, for example, there are now opportunities to do co-productions in terms of interactive. So, for example, we're now producing a feature-length film about the pirates of Somalia. It's a half animated film, half live action. It has a big online documentary, which we co-financed with Belgium and Germany. And through that, we were able to get a much bigger budget than we could ever have done only in the Netherlands. And that was something that was not possible 10 years ago.
Thank you. And last but not least, Ingrid.
Thanks. So my name is Ingrid Kopp. I'm Director of Digital Initiatives at the Tribeca Film Institute in New York City. So under that role, I do a bunch of different things. I guess the main thing is the TFI New Media Fund, which is a fund for non-fiction social issue documentaries that are interactive in some way. And we're really, we're broad and we change what that means all the time as things change. So I guess one of the first things to say is that, for me, I'm just really interested in technology as a storytelling medium, and I would never be prescriptive about what the fund will fund, because I feel like I want creators to come to me with projects and say, this is what we want to do, this is why it's interactive, and then we'll decide whether it's something we can fund. Because one of the things I've become really aware of in the last 3 years of running the fund is that, often things come down the pipeline that, and I'm completely surprised by them, or I've never thought of a particular storytelling, a particular technology as a storytelling medium. So projects we funded, 18 Days in Egypt. We put some money into Alma, which was an Arte project. Laika's Adventure, those of you who were at the Crossover Summit yesterday may have heard Errol King and Atlee talking about Laika's Adventure. We've just funded a project called League of Nannies, which is more, more analog in the way that it's created. For us, a lot of this is about audience. So we really think about the creators and how they want to use technology as a storytelling medium, but also about what audiences are doing and what they can do, and taking the audiences really seriously. And I think one of the things that I love and want to see more of in the space is just a sense of creating sort of spaces of joy and delight and play for audiences. I don't think there is enough of that in the space, and I think even though we're funding a lot of pretty big stories around social issues, that doesn't mean that you can't do that in the space. And then we also do a series of hackathons called Tribeca Hacks, and we've just done a storytelling innovation lab. So one of the things we do in addition to the fund is bring filmmakers together with technologists and designers to kind of play and experiment in this new space and think about what these new teams can make. So maker culture and hacker culture is a really big part of what I'm doing as well.
Okay, thank you. So some great words there: play, experiment, joy, technology, meaningful interaction, money. That's what this session's going to be all about, I hope. And because these aren't just your normal punters who turn up and just tell you what they've done that's great, they agreed to be quite honest and quite bold. And first off, we're going to talk about stuff that we did that didn't quite work as much as we would have liked, and what we learned from that. So there's some clips and some people are just going to talk. So Marianne, do you want to kick us off?
I mean, for us, this exercise of trying to understand what didn't work is something really important. We do only prototypes, I would say, so that each of them is born out of an editorial ambition, of technical experimentation, and also in terms of schemes of production. So that whether they are successful or not, the question of whether we reach our initial aim is something really interesting, and of course helps us for next projects. The first project I wanted to mention is a project called Barcode, which was released 1.5 years ago in October 2011. So you can find it on barcode.tv. So this was the issue there. Initially was try to put up an international co-production. We had already produced a number of projects and wanted to share experience and try to find partners. And at that time, it was really difficult to raise interest among ordinary actors of audiovisual production. And I remember having been here, having been in Amsterdam, and tried to raise interest on a number of other projects, and it didn't work. So in the end, we met the people from the NFB in Montreal, and started a kind of production framework with them. And the first project that was born out of this agreement was this Barcode project. One of the issues there was that the project was born out of a producer's idea, which is something which was not ordinary at all for Arte, which normally at that time relied a lot on proposals coming from creators, authors, producers. So that's one specificity of the project. And then another one is that what we tried to achieve there with this project is to bring an experience, I'd say, out of the screen in a way. Barcode is a website, it's an app, and it's also an installation. So that this project is really made for being experimented out on the streets, out in any circumstance of ordinary life, in relationship with screens, with mobile phones, or any screens available. So that was something, one of the issue to bring back the almost physical experience of hearing a story, sharing a story. Another thing with this project was that we found it really difficult to explain how there was not one author. If I want to credit all the authors of this project, that means like 40 people. And at that time, it was something quite difficult to explain. Directors, programmers, designers, producers, I mean, a whole bunch of people, and not one of them can claim to be the author of this project.
And can you just explain, or just to interject, in France, the auteur, the person who originates the project, has an unheard of power that in the Anglo-Saxon world we just don't understand, you know. Adam's the guy who commissioned it, so he tells you what goes in, and not so in France. So that shocked me to my core when I realised that is really, really difficult for collaborations.
Yeah, I mean it's an interesting aspect because it was difficult in several I mean, actually, the making of it was not difficult at all, and it's only when I found myself explaining how this thing was born to my colleagues in France, and the whole thing sound really bizarre to them. That, I mean, it works to bring tens of people around the table and think of a project and really conceive it and make it this way. And so that was a first step for us, a really interesting step. A second project I'd like to mention, but I don't know in what order we do that, because I know that Ingrid, who was part of it as well, wanted to talk about it, is Alma. So maybe...
Let's save
No,
that.
go ahead.
Shall I start?
Well, save it because we're going to see it in Ingrid's presentation. Now, are you showing Alma?
Yeah.
Yeah. So should we wait until we see it and come back to you?
Okay.
Can I
Nice.
just interject on that last point? I'm kind of quite long in the tooth for this sort of stuff now. I've been doing it at Channel 4 for 10 years, so that also relates to Femke's point earlier on in terms of how long the funding's been knocking around in different places. But one of the things I learned really early on as I moved from doing film and television into new media, as it was then called, interactive media, is that it's really not an auteur's world for the most part. I think it's an area where you really need to be able to work in a collaborative way. It's kind of cliched now, but it just doesn't work as an auteur's medium. And I don't think I've done any projects over those 10 or 11 years at Channel 4 that are fundamentally auteur-driven.
I couldn't agree more. Moving out of television into this world, what's exciting is you create a communion of fans, and if you're successful, the fans help shape what you're doing, and that's almost the obverse of what the auteurial vision is. Adam, should we... are you done for now? So Adam's going to talk a little bit about one of his less glorious successes.
Yeah, well, I think this one I count as a glorious failure. I was looking back at a couple of clips of it last night, and actually I think I take more pride in this than lots of stuff that sort of picked up silverware and done really well, because I think it's just an idea that was a bit ahead of its time. I mean, just to contextualise it, this is something that was done before The Only Way is Essex and before things like Made in Chelsea. It's an observational documentary which has a particular sort of heritage at Channel 4, which goes something like this. We started off with, obviously we were the UK broadcaster of Big Brother. In terms of documentary, at some point someone sat down and said, what happens if we just wire up a normal house like that? So we rigged up a house, and that became a series called The Family. Then extrapolating from that, someone said, well, what if we rigged up a bit of an institution? And that became One Born Every Minute, which rigged up a maternity ward, creating a different sort of observational documentary where you didn't have a crew sort of getting in the way of the intimacy of things. And then this was a further extension of that, which is what if we rigged up a piece of a city, and that became something called 7 Days, where in effect we filmed an observational documentary with a set of contributors within a particular area of London called Notting Hill, which was chosen because it has massive sort of diversity between rich and poor, ethnically and all other ways. So I'd like to start off by just showing a clip, and in this clip you'll see two airline pilots, male and female, married couple. And she's talking a bit about her experiences of being in this multi-platform documentary. And this was billed as being a new reality, which was partly a marketing thing to pick up from the fact that Big Brother had ended forever on Channel 4, and I think they wanted to pick up reality fans. But it's also, more importantly, a new reality in that it creates a whole different kind of relationship between viewer and participant in an observational documentary. So the woman in this refers at one point to ChatNav. ChatNav was basically a social media aggregator which brought together all the chat that was going on online about the programme. And we had, as the main participants, a number of people that lived in that area and that had a major life decision or life change coming up, so setting up new business or getting married or whatever. And the question that was asked of the audience and the interaction that was prompted was to ask, how do you think they should play this? What do you think they should do next? So that was really the question that people were answering. So I'd like to just show this short clip. It's the first one.
Thank you. It's called Tough Love, and I'm also getting a lot of slack. Okay, you say you don't care what people say.
Are you actually doing this just because people have said it? Not actually people, like random people you don't even know, convinced you?
No, I haven't done it because... I haven't just done it, Ben. How long have I been saying to you about how I found it difficult living with you at some point? You find it difficult living with me at some points. Of course you do. I'm your mum.
Yeah, because, Mum, I actually do want to live on my own. I do want to come home with a girl and have my mum upstairs going...
Of course you do.
Who wouldn't?
So you have to maybe work extra hours or put more of your wages into the flat.
I'm not saying I won't.
You have it easy here. But I can't put up with it any longer. I just can't put up with it any longer. I'll miss you when you've gone. Believe me, I won't be lonely, Ben. I won't.
There's people, though, that will purposely look for things they can pick at.
Because they can hide behind here. This whole thing that Channel 4 have done is to allow... It's interactive television. They're allowing everybody else to talk and have a say in what's going on. And the worst case about it is it's so current you can't escape it.
Yeah.
It's not like Big Brother. Big Brother, they shoved them all in a house and just kept everybody away. And as soon as they came out of the house, they were all too busy doing all their press, and after they finished with that, then they became normal. But some of them got absolutely victimised. You're not in a house.
I mean, I don't want to feel like I've thrown you out the door.
No,
but if I have to, I will. That's what I mean about toughening up. No, I'm 60 next year. I don't want to be 70 and things start to become like,
Mom,
I can't do things anymore.
Okay, stop
Time's
going
not
on
on my
about
side. I don't want to waste any more of my life.
Yeah, I know you're
with all
obviously getting to that age where you're like, God, shit, I need to do this, I need to do that.
Of course, I want to go back and have a few more adventures before it's too late.
Why am I holding you back from that?
Because you take so much of my energy away.
After everything, and then there's you doing a shoot with a
There's a couple of reasons I showed that clip.
big-ass machine gun. Yeah.
Oops, sorry. A couple of reasons I showed that clip. One of them is that you can start to get the sense of a new reality there in the way that they speak so knowingly about how the television and the interactivity are actually working together. So you've got one incidental contributor that's explaining to one of the main characters what's actually going on in her life and how this is going to impact on her, and start to think about how to play it. But the other reason I chose that clip, more importantly, is what's going on with that mother and son. So he's living at home still, he's an estate agent, and the mum has decided to kick him out. And what's interesting about that is she decided to kick him out on the basis of what people were saying online, as he says, I can't believe you're going to chuck me out because of what these people are saying. But I think that's a very interesting thing. It wasn't like the Truman Show, so it wasn't like, okay, whatever people say online, you've got to do. The contributors didn't have to use ChatNav. They could if they wanted to, but they didn't have to. But the interesting thing is most of them decided to look at what was being said there, and this was one of the major decisions that was made off the back, primarily of what had been going on between two episodes. And these episodes went out weekly, so the whole documentary was turned around in the space of a week, so it's super topical. So that's the first clip. I want to show you another quick clip, which is, the one with the airline pilots. I thought it was the other way around. But the interesting thing, what this clip represents, is the fact that it was in episode 2, and it was the point at which things went completely bonkers online, and we had a sort of spike that outspiked Big Brother in terms of the engagement and the number of people that piled online to take part. And what prompted the spike was not a call to action that said, you know, go on online and tell us what you think. It's when people watched this particular sequence and they realised that the contributors in the documentary were actually paying attention to what they were saying. And so they kind of got it, and it's like, oh, that's what's going to happen, that's how it works. And then they just piled online. So it was a really interesting phenomenon. So if we could see the second clip, please.
Well, you're a junior.
There's people responding to my tweets. It says that I bully you.
Do you indeed?
Do you think
probably a bit, yeah.
It says
Yeah.
that I would get you breastfeeding if you could lactate.
Yeah.
Because I'm that bossy.
Because I got moves. Can we open it up? Daddy, very strong.
It says here, just heard Richard Curtis bumped into Hannah Booth today from 7 Days and told her he loved her.
Lucky old Hannah. Praise indeed from the man who made Notting Hill what it is, eh?
It's a real mixed bag, isn't it? People love it. People hate it.
It's like Marmite.
Okay, top and tail.
All right.
This chat though is seriously addictive.
Is it?
If I was watching the show and I was writing on this, I wouldn't write nasty things. And even if I didn't like the characters, I probably wouldn't write nasty things. But some people, they're quite vindictive.
What does that feel like?
I don't mind at all because I know they don't know me. But it's interesting. It's certainly a new experience to have people I don't know judging and making comments on my life. But that's what I asked for when I invited the cameras into my house, I suppose.
Babies, come on.
It's quite interesting, actually. Quite like it. I like the challenge.
Bye-bye, John.
Hi. Lovely.
So, you know, to what degree it worked is kind of debatable. I mean, in terms of TV ratings, it didn't work wonderfully. But I think as a sort of an ambitious, interactive project, I think I still feel it, it feels like a real landmark to me and a bit of unfinished business, because I think no one's really taken that particular way of creating an interesting reality of that kind further yet, and I think that's an interesting avenue to explore. There's all kinds of things I can tell you in terms of what we learned from it. There are technical things, I mean, basically the sort of degree of engagement and sort of how quickly you get those kind of spikes for sort of mainstream peak time broadcast was a sort of technical challenge at the time, and the site fell over at that particular point. The way that we sort of set things up technically at Channel 4 has changed massively over the years, because it's just not an easy thing to pull off that kind of pattern of usage. But much more importantly, I think I'd take it as a lesson in sharing. So to give it a context, this came out just after Big Brother ended forever on Channel 4, and it was quite sort of exposed in that way. And the way that they set about dealing with it was very much with a Big Brother sort of way of thinking. So they didn't release any details about who the participants were going to be. It was all like this, sort of guarding your homework type of thing. And interestingly, we had a first episode which was like a sort of just episode 0 to check whether we could actually make a program in 7 days in this way. And what was interesting about it was episode 0 and episode 3 were by far the best, most funny and amusing and insightful episodes that we had, and it never saw the light of day. And I think if you were doing this in a clever way, the first thing you do is whack episode 0 straight online before the show starts going out, so people A, know who the characters are, and B, understand how the interactions work. And that kind of open approach, just especially at that time, I mean, this is 3 or 4 years ago we're talking here, 3.5 years ago, it was sort of anathema to TV folk. But I think if we were doing this again now, I wouldn't have too much trouble persuading people that it doesn't erode your audience, it doesn't blow anything, to work in that sort of open way.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think it is amazing to think that it's only 3 years ago that people didn't understand that you could see stuff on the internet and it would be a benefit rather than a threat.
And it's not only 3 years ago.
Really?
I mean, yeah, this is
still you have.
It is an issue, and the terms within which we discuss it are much more open, but it's not solved yet.
Well, I think it's quite counterintuitive. I worked on another show called Into the Wild, which involved sending this guy into the wild of the Yukon for 12 weeks on his own. And with that one, we published a big chunk of the rushes, or the dailies, long before the show actually hit the air. So we were filming across the summer. It didn't play out till the autumn. But that kind of activity, it doesn't undermine your audience or spoil your narrative. People just want to see how it's going to end up cut together and what the whole thing looks like. So, you know, it used to seem a bit counterintuitive, but most of these activities do not undermine your TV audience.
Massive word of mouth for that from my 21-year-old son was telling me all about that. Briefly, part of the problem with 7 Days for my 2 kids were they thought they were going to get to cast it. So they were hugely excited by the billboard thing. And then when they rocked up and it was already cast, they kind of left it after 25 minutes. It didn't actually go quite far enough for them. Femke.
So when you asked me to think about things to show that didn't work, I was looking through the website and I realized a lot of the things disappear basically because of the technology is changing, and the more interactive projects were, the harder it is to maintain them. So I can, I will describe one project that we have some stills left, but it was basically a documentary alternate reality game we did in, I think it was 2004 or something, and it was a combination with a television program by a Dutch public broadcaster called NPS. And it was a TV show that already existed called Crisis. And in this television program, 6 well-known politicians would play out a role-playing game in about 6 hours, which was then edited back to an hour-long broadcast. And for example, on Crisis, they would do was an airplane would be kidnapped, and then each politician got a role. So one would be the mayor, one would be the director of the airport. And then they had to solve this crisis, and people would see how politicians dealt with this. And it was a very popular show because you really saw some politicians who could not deal with the crisis. So politicians would come with assistants and suitcases full of material to prepare, but they were not allowed to see the crisis beforehand, so they were kind of blank going in. Then we developed an online documentary game where the audience in the week before the broadcast would play the same role-playing game, but real time. So if this hijack would take place over a period of 7 days, the documentary game also took 7 days. And the audience also got a role, so they came together in an animated virtual set. They would all take a role, the same that the politicians had. And then they would real time have to come up with solutions and get in discussion with each other to make decisions. So we did this through email, so you became a member of the team, you got notifications through email and I think also SMS. And then you had to discuss and vote for decisions, and you could real time see how the crisis play out. And then by the end of the week, you could see how the real politicians dealt with the same crisis on television. But I still think it was a very cool concept, but at the time it was, the technology was difficult, the whole thing with the mobile phones and the email made it that it was, there was a core group who loved it and they were completely addicted for 7 days, but it didn't become like a mainstream thing. And I think now we're actually speaking with this broadcaster again to see with current, like to basically redesign it and do it again, because this television show was also off the air for a couple of years. So that was one thing. Another project, for example, we did was Collapses. It was a project we did, I think, 3 years ago. Again, it was a companion to a television film this time. We worked together with VPRO. They did a documentary about oil crisis and the fact that we're running out of oil in about a decade. And the film was going to be based on a scenario made by a professor who wrote a fictional scenario, but based on true facts on how the next 20 years would play out. And then this was visualized in a documentary. But because documentaries in the Netherlands have an average age group of 55, or I think actually 59 and up, they asked us, can you rethink this subject as an online interactive documentary? I can show maybe a little bit trailer for it. It's called Collapses. Yeah.
Hi everybody, this is Tommy Pilata.
This is a walkthrough that
I'm
kind of
the
explains the
director
game.
Of Collapses, the energy risk conspiracy. I'm going to take you through a little walkthrough of the experience. So what you're seeing right here is a little introduction. Gives you a little taste of what's to come, and it just sort of creates a context for the experience.
Everything's gone to a crisis point. It's now full-out civil war, fueled by blood, oil, and oppression.
This is an example of transmedia, and transmedia is multiple platform storytelling. This project started out a documentary for television about the imminent energy transition from fossil fuels to alternative energy sources. And they came to Submarine Channel to create a multimedia experience that attracts a different kind of audience. One of the design choices we made was to approach this using a 3-panel system. And the center panel that you see here is the main sort of fictional storyline. And you'll notice that the right side and the left side will light up at certain points in the story. If you go to the right side, that's the documentary portion where you'll get interviews with experts in the field or additional blogs from the characters. And then to the left, you'll get the interactive portion. They wanted to get the same sort of issues out in a way that was going to be interesting to younger people and the connected generation. So our idea was to create an experience that's sort of an annotated narrative. What this is really, it's part fiction. It's about these 10 young people all over the world and how this energy crisis affects them. It's part documentary, so you have moments where you can go into actual talking heads and people talking about the issues and predictions. And then there's an interactive component. So there's 3 components, a sort of a fiction, a documentary, and an interactive component.
And so the thing that was difficult with this project was that the collaboration, so you already mentioned the notion of authorship, that in the television department, although it was their initiative to want to make an interactive component, there's the system of the directors and researchers was not really, how do you say that? They were not used to work in this different way, where you form a team where both the interactive and the film are developed and are really in sync with each other. So what we have learned from it, that the best thing is to do is to produce both in-house. So I think the web documentaries that we have done completely in-house, where we both create the film and the interactive, or just solely the interactive, it's much easier to manage both in terms of planning, but also in terms of collaboration. For example, because the interactive had a fictional storyline, we wanted to use the same storyline as the filmmakers would do in the film. But filmmakers were not used, because they were all financed within the broadcaster, they didn't have to write plans or applications. They didn't really have a storyline until they were editing or shooting, which in terms of the planning of making the game and the documentary part was way too late for us. So we were much further ahead in production than they were, and that made that, I think, the project in its totality was not really in sync. So I think the now Collapses kind of stands on its own as a web doc, and is kind of far removed from the television film.
Okay, thank you, Femke. And a plea to Sheffield next year: please, can we run stuff live off our Macs? It is. You don't, go and look at this stuff on the web. That was a good trailer because we were walked through it. But when we're pulling clips down and showing you it like it's bits of television, you're kind of losing 70% of the value of it. And Ingrid, you're going to talk to us.
Sure. Well, I mean, one of the first things I would say is for us, failure is kind of part of our DNA. One of the things we try and do is fail gloriously and fail publicly and embrace our failures, because in this space, so much of what we do is experimental, and we're figuring stuff out as we go along. And if we weren't failing, I think we'd probably be doing the wrong thing, because so much of this is about, new stuff, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And with every project, there are things that work and things that don't work, and we learn as we go. And I think I kind of see our role in digital initiatives at the Tribeca Film Institute as basically being the permanent R&D department. And in the development community, there's this thing called Fail Fair, where they get everyone together in a conference, and instead of talking about how wonderful they are, they talk about the things that they've done wrong and what didn't work and why. And I don't think there's enough of that happens in any industry, and certainly in this industry. And I think, it's really made me feel so much more positive. Well, two things actually that have made me feel more positive. One, once I embraced the failure and embraced the sense that this was always going to feel a little bit tricky, it made my job so much more fun, and I was much braver in terms of the projects that I selected. And the other one is I realized that this wasn't a problem to solve. When I first started doing this job, it was like, okay, everything's changed, technology's constantly changing exponentially, we've got to figure this out so that we can move on. And then I realized, actually, that's not what it is. It's just permanent change, and you just have to constantly move with it. And as soon as you solve one problem, there's a new problem that arises, and it's just going to be like that, I think, from now on. So those relaxing into that sort of permanent state of flux has really made me enjoy what I do so much more, and I think has really led me to do more interesting things. So that's what Tribeca Hacks came out of. We do this TFI Interactive conference at the festival. And one thing I forgot to mention at the beginning is we also now have this section at the Tribeca Film Festival called Storyscapes, where we get to actually show this work in an immersive environment, because for us, obviously, because we're not necessarily supporting things that have the television or theatrical anchor, we really wanted a space where people could see this offline and in a sort of communal setting. So it's now an official juried section of the Tribeca Film Festival, which is super exciting for me, because I really want to be able to join the dots from pre-production all the way through to exhibition and distribution. So I just wanted to put that out there. The other thing I just wanted to quickly say is all the projects that we funded and kind of like what we've learned so far is on this website that we created called TFI Sandbox. So I encourage you to check out the Sandbox, because you can just go and see, what we've done so far. And some of the projects on there do talk about what worked and what didn't work. So the project I wanted to talk about was one of the projects we funded in our first year called 18 Days in Egypt, which is a project that I'm really proud of because I think it was really brave and really ambitious. They actually created a bespoke platform for it called GroupStream. But it did bring up a bunch of different issues, one of which is the project. Well, maybe we should watch do you want to bring up the first slide and we can just quickly look at the trailer they created for it? I know some of you may know this project. Jigger was here last year with it. And then we can talk about it afterwards.
أنا كنت هنا. أنا كنت غاضب. أنا مشيت هنا. أنا وعيلتي كنا هنا. أنا وولادي كنت هنا. أنا كنت فخور.
بالتحرير. أنا وعيلتي كلها كنا هنا وفخورين جدا باللي عملوه الشباب المصريين. أنا كنت على الفيسبوك.
أنا كنت بصور.
أنا كنت بتويت.
أنا أخدت صورة موبايلي تسجيل التاريخ.
ممكن نحكي قصتنا عن طريق إعلام نصنعه بإيدينا ونصنعه بنفسنا.
هتفت مسلم ومسيحي إيد واحدة.
أنا كنت على الكوبري يوم 28 جمعة الغضب وسط الغاز المثير للدموع.
يوم ال 18 لما مبارك اتنحى احتفلت وسجلت احتفالات الشعب.
قصتك تهمنا ودلوقتي في مكان ان انت تحكي لنا عنها.
انت عشتها وسجلتها، يلا نكتب تاريخ بلدنا. شارك على 18daysinegypt.com.
So, part of what excited us about this was this idea of curating social media. I was really interested in one of the reasons that we started the fund, and Ford Foundation, who support us in the fund, one of their challenges to us were, audiences for documentaries are changing. On television in the US, they tend to be quite old, quite white. How do we reach diverse younger audiences, across platforms? How do we get audiences excited about, important stories? How do we meet them where they already are in terms of the way that they're consuming media? And that was really exciting. For me, actually, it was exciting starting with the audience and then thinking about the creators, and we kind of came at it that way. And obviously social media, because it's, global, ubiquitous and cheap, was a really interesting place to start. And creating a space where people could share these stories and where they could be archived and collected was wonderful. But a couple of things came up. One, obviously, is digital access, that a lot of people didn't know about 18daysinegypt.com, people who were on the ground. A lot of people didn't actually have access to broadband or to technology. And one of the other issues were that I think the filmmakers, the creators, didn't really think about who their audience for this was before they started doing it. It seemed like a good idea. There was a germ of something wonderful there, but in terms of sort of like the user experience design and like getting it out to the audience, they just hadn't really done that work. And I think that showed as the project developed. I think that they realized that they'd gone quite far, and then certain things that they'd built weren't necessarily relevant. Another issue that came up, and that Jigga will talk about, and the reason, by the way, that I talk about this project is because it is one that I'm really proud of, and because I think Jigga Mehta, who's one of the creators of it, is really extraordinary in the way that he thinks about this field. But another thing that they never really thought about was how to get out of it. With a lot of this work, these projects go on and on and on for a long time, and how do you end them? And so for one of the things that I said to him when I said, what do you wish you'd known at the beginning? He was like, an exit strategy. Like, we just didn't think about that. We were so busy trying to launch the project that we never thought about when the project would end and how we would go on as filmmakers and creators to do other work. And who would we hand it over to, and who pays for the broadband, and who does the community management. So, these are just all really interesting lessons to learn, and that's why I use this project. Not because I'm like, this is a project that, God, I wish we had never done that. It's a project that I think we learned some of the most interesting and important lessons from.
No, it's really about the life cycle point. One of the things when I'm commissioning stuff, I always make a big point of is for people to actually plan out the life cycle, whether that's short term or long term. It may be years, it may be days, but it's really critical to have that sort of perspective, because otherwise the chances of creating any sort of meaningful legacy from what you're doing are much reduced, and of creating sustainable things. So most of the projects that I commission at Channel 4 have a sort of exit strategy built in from the very first specification. Quite often it's about handing over the infrastructure or whatever's been created to often to charities or public institutions. So, for example, with Big Fish Fight, everything that was created there handed over to the Marine Conservation Society. With the Great British Property Scandal, which I'm hoping to show a bit later on, everything there handed over to the Empty Homes charity. So it doesn't really matter what kind of life cycle or what kind of timescale you've got in mind. It's really worth sketching out at the beginning what you think the entire life cycle is like, even if you have to change it at some point along the journey because things pan out differently.
Okay, I'm going to ask Marianne that point, and then, I think we're at the halfway point, so we're going to take some questions now. So if you can wait for the microphones to get to you, can we get the microphones out there now, please? There's a lady over there, if you put your hand up, and we'll take, however many questions we've got before we go on to the glittering triumphs. Marianne, as a broadcaster yourself, though, how's the curation and the...
This is a really interesting question, because what we do is both producing experiences and content, so that the way you consider it in terms of scheduling public speaking is really interesting, and it also raises questions, but this is much more here of rights, of ownership of rights and liberation. The question for us, we made the same path in a way, so that project after project we learned to include at the very beginning of the productions of project the issues of maintaining projects, of managing communities, but every project is different in these terms, and depending on the partners we work with, either producers or co-broadcasters, the solution we find are different. I'd like to mention one project we're working on at the moment, which will be released next autumn, which is called Fort McMoney, which is something we co-produce. It's a Canadian initiative from a production company called Toxa, and co-produced by the French part of the NFB and by us. Maybe we start with a trailer, so the Fort McMoney trailer, please.
And then we are taking questions after this.
The first impression most people have is the long drive north in the middle of the forest for a couple of hours of time, and all you see are the trees, and you wonder if there's going to be a civilization at the end. But inevitably, when we got into town, it was just better than we could have imagined.
C'est à ma connaissance une des villes qui a connu la plus forte croissance en Amérique du Nord tout au long des dernières décennies.
In short, it is an enterprise of epic proportions, akin to building the pyramids or China's Great Wall, only bigger.
Let's go to McMurray, the big boom town.
The average salary for a family is somewhere around $180,000 a year.
One more!
Everybody's living hard, drinking hard, playing hard, spending their money, and God bless them for spending their money.
We are so much more than money. We're more than oil sands. We're more than money. We're a community.
All across the globe, people are benefiting from what's happening here.
They call it development. We call it destruction.
We're proud of the oil sands and what it contributes to the nation and to around the world. We take the environmental concerns very seriously.
The oil and gas industry has fostered education, it extends the lifetime, it improves the quality of life. I'd say it's improved democracy.
Vous avez juste un employeur. Que vous l'appelez Total, Syncor, Syncrude, Exxon, c'est un employeur, c'est oil.
Fort McMurray is supposed to be the #1 place to make money in North America.
There's no big wealth here, except maybe in the pockets of the oil barons and their lackeys.
So the idea with this, very briefly, is to both document, investigate, and raise awareness about a very central energy issue. The way it's going to be done raises interesting question in terms of project management, because this is going to be available worldwide, and our ambition is to rely on partnership with mainly newspapers with a strong online community, and locally strong, meaning North America, whether French-speaking or British, English-speaking, and also in Europe, in France, Germany, and maybe here. And so we have a kind of distribution issue. We have an editorial issue, because what we aim at is to offer a platform of interaction between the audience of these partners and our audience. And this has to be organized also within a very precise schedule, because this is a game and it's going to be live. It's going to be moderated live. So all this has to be run in a very subtle way.
Can I ask, does it presuppose that the tar sands is a bad thing? Is it engaged on one side of the debate, or is it open to the players to shape?
I mean, this is led by a journalist called David Dufresne, who's quite famous in France. Who's now based in Canada. He's very strong investigative journalist. Obviously, he's preoccupied with the issue, which means something, but he's doing his journalistic work in as open a way as possible. So basically, this is the place for a debate. I mean, this is the ambition of the project.
Thank you. Right, we're going to take some questions. So there was a question out there. Yeah, have you got a mic? Put your hands up if you have got a question, because we've got to get the mics to you. So there's one coming there. Any other questions? No? Okay. Oh, yeah, the guy down here as well. Can we get a mic to this guy? Okay, go ahead.
I've got a question for Ingrid about getting to know your audience better. It seems really hard with these types of projects to know your audience well before you start, and it's only when you have prototypes and you can actually test things out on people that you really get to know how they're going to interact with them and what kind of things they want. So do you have any advice about how to get more information earlier on?
Well, I mean, one of the things which we touched on is like maybe not keeping everything so close to your chest, because and it's such a different process to how you would release a film, because you may want to actually get some stuff out there and test it and be a little bit public quite early on, like you were talking about with the episode 0, that actually you could, Channel 4 could have learned a lot from getting that out early online. So I think that's part of it, and that can be anything from social media, seeing how people are responding on Twitter and Facebook and Tumblr, to releasing videos on YouTube and Vimeo and seeing the kinds of responses. It can be things like that. It can be things like A/B testing. It can be, on paper exercises like user journeys and personas. I absolutely, I'm the first person to say that those things don't always work, but they're definitely a good way of starting to feel it out. And actually, it was interesting with 18 Days in Egypt, is they actually did a crossover lab, and that is when they realized that some of their assumptions about their audience were wrong, right? As soon as they started to think about, Mike in Seattle who wakes up in the morning and does this and that, they were like, Mike in Seattle's never going to go to 18daysinegypt.com. So, those things I think can be useful. And obviously, depending on who you're working with, whether it be with a broadcaster or digital agencies, you might have access to other sorts of demographic information. But one of the things that I will say is that you can get some really interesting information already freely online about, the kinds of demographics using certain social networks. And you can do some really interesting research there, pretty much for free. So I think sort of seeding your project online and getting feedback in that way can be one of the best ways of doing it. And I've definitely learned really important lessons with a lot of our projects about doing that. Another project, actually, and Rafiq is sitting behind you, who worked on Dadaab Stories, which I thought was such a wonderful example of, they wanted to make a project about the Dadaab refugee camp in Kenya, and they wanted it to be, sexy and interesting and show that refugees are people doing, cooking and making music, and they actually built the entire project on Tumblr. You could actually bring it up if it's the website, the Dadaab Stories. And I think it's so great in the sense that it's using Tumblr, which is, already a very visual platform that already has a very young, dynamic crowd who are into fashion and music and cooking. So to not build a platform from scratch, but use a platform that already has a built-in audience was so smart. And then they reskinned it so that if you look at the website, you wouldn't necessarily even know you were on Tumblr, but you do have that bedrock of an audience that are already on there, already using it. And they already have more than 10,000 followers on there because of that. So I think that's a really good example of, fishing where the fish are, to use one of my many hackneyed expressions.
Thank you very much. Good question.
I'm a graduate of the National Film Television School, director of documentary, so I'm primarily, I guess, a documentary filmmaker and trying to find stories to tell. And I'm very interested in all this and all the good contributions, presentations. Something that's coming to my mind, more than a question, I'm just throwing it out there, see if you can maybe give it more shape for me, which is, you've outlined two major stages in the development of interactive docs, which was in terms of 10 years ago and the difficulty of defining what the projects could be. A second stage, which was the limitations of the technology. I wonder if there's still a kind of reticence on the part of the industry, gatekeepers, however you want to define ourselves, in terms of relinquishing the final editorial wrapper, as it were, to the audience, by which I mean, I guess, that the ending of the story, we're still kind of reticent to give it to the audience.
I think that
does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. I think it's a really good question. I think there's a problem for legacy broadcasters, if you like. I think Channel 4 in this country are probably the most advanced in understanding that you can't be authoritative and in communion. I think that I'm running a YouTube channel with BBC Worldwide and having to do BBC compliance, which means that we have to, anyone that wants to put a video response up, we have to investigate whether they're a paedophile and go into their, it's just kind of crazy. It's stuff from the 1960s. But good question. I wonder what the rest of you think.
When I came out the station this morning, the first thing that you see is that big sculpture with the water running down it, and I whipped out my phone and sent a photograph of that to a thing called Big Art Mob, which is actually something that I commissioned in 2005. It was a project about public art, and it's still a community that's on the go. But what was interesting, I remember really clearly going into the Arts Council in about 2006 when we were partnering with them, and they just could not get their head around the notion that you would even sort of publish stuff that the Great Unwashed had produced themselves. So they had real issues about quality, and also the notion of sort of releasing, handing over editorial control was completely anathema. Although, interestingly, over the years, you could see as it started to sink in, and then they said, that stuff you told us in 2006, you were right. But I think as a broadcaster, what's really important is you have to think very hard about what you can bring to the party. So you've got to try and bring things to interactive documentary that no one else can really do. And one of the things that you can offer is editorial control or editorial influence. So a lot of the projects that I've done actually seed some degree of editorial control. So when I did a program called Embarrassing Bodies Live from the Clinic, we gave 100% of editorial control over to the audience, and they dictated the running order of the program and the agenda for the program 100%. So that's right up one end of the scale. But what that does push you in the direction of is that this thing that I was talking about before of rewarding interaction, if you can actually make people's interactions, if you can weave that into the body of the film, and the audience can actually help participate or contribute to the film or influence it or whatever, that's a massive plus, and it really gives the energy to these kind of projects. But I think it's totally doable, and the time for it is here and now.
I think broadcasts have gotten also a lot opener over the years, and I think maybe like you say that a couple of years ago, audience participating or contributing content was seen as scary or dangerous, would be very closely monitored. And now you see that that's much more open debate. Also things even, and I think even TV is adapting to it in a way. Like, for example, clearing of rights is of course a huge issue with film. And with all the online projects, it was always like a big deal that we would clear all the rights, But at the same time, you see on major television shows all the time they're showing stuff out of YouTube, which has not been cleared. So you see that television itself is also changing through the influence of the internet.
And I think also even more than just, I think the tension between authorship and openness is a really interesting thing in this space, and is part of what makes the work interesting. And it is a tension, and I think it's definitely something you have to deal with. But I also, something that interests me as well is just this idea of the interaction as the story. And I think that often we're really asking the audience to do a lot of work, clicking around, and there's been this whole sort of misunderstanding that the space is a choose-your-own-adventure, which I think is the last thing that most of these projects are. And in the Storytelling Innovation Lab, you can actually go and, if you do a Google search for it, it'll bring up all the projects, because one of the requirements of people who went through the lab is that they published their code online on GitHub. so that the code was open source and that they put their projects online no matter how rough. So one of the projects actually published fully on the 5th day of the lab. The others put up their prototypes, and you can look at the Do Not Track one. And Do Not Track is about how you get tracked online, with cookies, and it's using the software Mozilla developed called Collusion. So as you're going through the film and being about tracking, it's tracking you and showing you how you're being tracked as you enter websites. So the interaction is the story. It's not like this thing that's added on top. In a sort of confusing fashion.
Yeah, to add something to what Ingrid says, I mean, when we talk about this contributive aspect versus author, the aspect, it's still a question of who's the author. And I think we're already a step further, meaning that we're talking about experience now, and so that we go from top-down delivering of content, and it's not either a kind of mix, everybody contributes to it. The question is, what is the experience? And it's increasingly looking towards personalized films, for instance, or, as Ingrid said, the question being, what is the interaction telling as a story? So that, the question is not who's behind it.
Okay, we're gonna run out of time. It's up to you. We can keep taking questions, or what I think might be better, is to just see the clips of the things they're most proud of. But it's kind of up to you. If you shout out by acclamation, we all want to ask questions, then we'll do that. Clips? Clips. Okay, Adam, just 1 second clip, please.
Okay, well, actually, that was a perfect sort of intro to this, because I want to show something that picks up on Ingrid's phrase about the interaction is the story. This is a project that I did last year and a bit of the year before about empty homes in Britain, because there's 1 million empty homes in Britain and 2 million families in need of a home. So that's the starting point. So I'm going to show you 3 very short clips in a row. If we could start off with the 1 minute one, which sets up what the actual scope of the project is. So that's the online campaign film, set it up as concisely as I can. Now I want to go on to a second clip, which interestingly comes from another show. It's not from the main series, which was called The Great British Property Scandal. This was from another show that ran about the same time with another Channel 4 personality involved in it. So you'll see 2 people on screen. One of them is the person that leads this campaign, and the other one is another Channel 4 property expert. And what you'll see is this thing of the interaction becoming the story. So if we could have the second clip.
It'll tie in perfectly.
Oh, sorry, actually, they've got to queue it up, so I might just keep talking for a second. But what you'll see from the second clip is that it's a real example of show, don't tell. It shows you how you can interact with the show. And what it shows you is an app that we built. It was a really cheap app, very simple. But what it did was it meant you could photograph or enter the details of an empty property that you knew in your community, and it would send those details directly to the person responsible, the empty homes officer in the local authority that was responsible for doing something about it. So you didn't have to do anything. It was all done by GPS, very simple. Are we okay to go now? Lovely.
4 weeks. Just think what we could do if the system and the landlords were permanently on our side. If we're going to make a difference to Britain's empty homes, we have to rally together. And there's something you can do, as demonstrated by none other than fellow Empty Homes campaigner, Mr. George Clark. He spent the last 6 months shouting the message loud and clear to the government, councils and empty homeowners that action needs to be taken. Now I've invited him down to my patch to find out how his campaign can help identify potential homes above shops and businesses.
So the app is called the Empty Home Spotter, and it's for people to use to take shots of any empties in their area to raise awareness of the issue. And automatically when they take a shot of something, that goes right through to their council.
Okay.
So it's really putting the council on the back foot, kind of power to the people, if you like, for empty homes.
I like it, George, I like it. We could take pictures of flats above shops as well.
Absolutely, it'll tie in perfectly for that, to be honest.
One doesn't look
that one there looks very, very, very unoccupied to me.
There's one next to it.
Yeah, but let's do both.
Gotcha. So right away, that's gone through to the council's office.
Yeah, automatically.
They'll
Land on their desk and it'll make them aware of that empty in their area. But I think what's good about it with the app is it really does give power to people. It really does. And if we can go around and people can spot them, and report them to the council.
They're going to have to do something about it.
Absolutely.
Well, that's the plan.
I hope so.
Go to our website, channel4.com/property-scandal to use our empty home.
Then, you know, what this really shows with just, you know, quite reasonable sort of investment is how this interaction can actually become the spine of something. And just to sort of, I'm going to show you one last short clip to show you the outcome of this interactivity. Yep, it's the bottom line of all of this is that there's a very powerful place between popular television and interactive media that can create really amazing constructive change. So if I could finish off with that last clip, please.
Noticed it empty, I think 20 years plus ago, and having regularly looked at it and always thought this is really tragic, you know, someone ought to be living in it. And because it was privately owned, thought there was nothing I could do about it. I watched the Great British Property Scandal on TV. I reported it to the Channel 4 website because I thought that a little bit of extra weight wouldn't go amiss. And within 4 months it was occupied. Certainly it's had a result in this instance, and I hope that this has happened in very many other places all around the country.
We've lived next door to an empty home for over 5 years now. We saw the Great British Property Scandal, reported the empty, and since then the property has had a flurry of activity. The property has been done up, the rear yard's been cleared, it's had new windows, a new front door, new kitchen, new bathroom, and been decorated throughout. I think the campaign's been great, certainly for us. I don't think, being honest, that anything would have happened with this property if we hadn't have reported it. So to have someone actually living there and the property back into use is great.
I realised that I could do something about the empty property next door to mine. The property had been empty for about 30 years. Through the programme, I found that I could contact the council. So 7 months after I reported the property to the website, it's now ready to be lived in.
I watched the programme, The Great British Property Scandal, and my awareness was raised of empty houses, and after that I noticed this house. It was obviously derelict and had been for quite some time. I'm very pleased that it's going to be brought back into use.
My name's Dean. I was homeless for a couple of years, spent some time sofa surfing, mainly on this estate with friends, families and such. While I was here, I noticed 2 empty flats there. Both these flats have been empty for about 2 years. They're both council-owned. As soon as I saw the programme...
Okay, no worries.
So, Femke.
Yeah, so I'll show a little clip of, actually it's on a keynote presentation. It's a project we're launching in 2 weeks, so I'll show first a little trailer and then go through some slides to explain the project. It's called Unspeak. It's an adaptation of an English non-fiction book by writer Stephen Poole. The book is about
a series that looks at how language can smuggle persuasion into description.
Yes, can you play the trailer?
This is where you have to interpret it through the medium of mime.
Yes, exactly. It's a project we presented at the meeting
Another example,
2 years ago.
exploiting the optimistic connotations of America.
It's the next slide. Next one, sorry.
This is Unspeak, a series that looks at how language can smuggle persuasion into description.
Sorry, it's not working well.
Which side you came down on really depended on whether you thought post-September the 11th we had to be change makers or whether we could still be managers. Up to September the 11th, we'd been managing this issue. After September the 11th, we decided we had to confront and change.
So Unspeak is a name for something, but it's not a neutral name. It's trying to smuggle in a particular point of view and silence any possible dissent.
So we produce a number of short films that each portray one Unspeak term. So one is about the financial crisis, one is about the whole idea of file sharing and copyright.
Perhaps we can fight back.
And the short films are made by different directors from around the world. One was done by Jennifer Abbott, who directed The Corporation a couple of years ago. One was directed by Tommy Poloda. And then around those episodes, maybe you can just click through the slides if that's okay. We made a number of data visualizations around these terms. So here you see the website. You can watch the app and the short films. You can analyze the data around these terms. So if you go on to the next slide, these are, for example, the episodes page.
Which side you came down on?
This is a whole episode, so maybe go through this. Might not have enough time for that. There's an urban dictionary where here you see terms like build out, binders full of women, binge eating disorder. So we started with a dictionary where people can add terms to, and they can comment on the meaning of the terms. So it's kind of a growing database of terms to reveal obscure meanings, and also this will be really a living site where people, like now, for example, whistleblower is a new term where, of course, was already in there, but got all kinds of new meanings over the last week. And then we add a number of data visualizations that reflect Unspeak in the media by analyzing Twitter, Wikipedia, and the Google News Index. There's one data visualization that tracks how these terms spread through newspapers around the world and magazines, how they are picked up, how they are, what other terms are used around it. One is analyzing Twitter, so you can see how people are discussing terms on Twitter. So here you can see a couple of these data visualizations. And you can see in what context these terms are used and what related terms often appear next to them. And you can also track the sentiments, the gender, the age, and the location. So you can see also how these terms differ in meaning around the world.
Who funded it and what platform is it on?
This is will be shown on submarinechannel.com. We are
your own platform.
Yes. But we are discussing with we pitched it actually here in a meat market a few years ago, or in ITFA, I don't remember. And broadcasters really love the idea. The only thing is that the short films are collage films, so all footage is taken from YouTube. So now we're speaking with a number of newspapers, and actually there's one TV format that's now interested in taking the shorts anyway.
Thank you. Ingrid.
So I'm not going to show it because I think we're running out of time, and also the clip really does not do justice to the project. But Alma, which is a project that Arte funded, I think is such a beautiful example of the interactivity and the storytelling coming together in a seamless package. Alexandra from Upien is in the audience. You can talk to him about it. The reason I don't want to show it to you as the trouble with showing this work as a trailer is that the whole point is that you are interacting with it, and it's beautiful on an iPad. It's a free app on an iPad. So Arte, A Tale of Violence. I recommend if you have an iPad doing it on there, but you can also look at it on a desktop, a laptop. But yeah, I just think the way that the story and the interactivity come together in that project is really beautiful. Upien were also involved with Do Not Track, the project I talked about before, so that is the man you want to talk to if you want to know about any of those projects. But I do think that it's a 40-minute experience. It's a very, very intense, quite disturbing at times confession And I think just showing you a little quick clip isn't really going to do it justice. And one of the things I love is, like, if you look at Alma next to Dad Stories, next to Laika's Adventure, which is really looking at this robot that travels around the world, next to 18 Days in Egypt, I think you can see the full range of how we're trying lots and lots of different kinds of things, which is exciting.
We're running very, very short of time. We will take one or two last questions if we can get the mics out, if people get their hands up. I'd just like to thank Alexandra for putting this panel together. I do loads of these panels, and I've actually heard more stimulating stuff in the 90 minutes I've been sitting up here than I have in about the last year of doing this stuff. And I thought there were some really good concrete points. I thought Ingrid's point about use Tumblr, use YouTube. If you're a young documentary maker and you're kind of frustrated, get onto a well-populated YouTube site and post a video response of your material. You can pick up 10, 15, 20,000 likes. You take that to a broadcaster or a funder, they're going to take that very, very seriously. I think Adam gave us the perfect example of what meaningful interaction means. It's not about have two endings you decide necessarily, is it? And I thought that really, really interesting to hear Arte, who I think of as being the home of the creative documentary, the auteur's vision, how they're kind of turning the model almost upside down now and becoming super collaborative and online, or trying to. And Femke, favourite of all, because that format that you talked about being 10 years old, I've been trying to work on with Channel 4 and Oil Studios for about the last 6 months, and you were 10 years ahead of us. Wow. Any questions in the room? Yes, one at the back.
Thank you. Hello. To keep up with the experimentation, I have a question for Ingrid. I really like the idea that the Tribeca Hacks, you have a space and a time for filmmakers, technologists, designers to come together and to play around and even, I guess, mess around to find what is the next big thing in interactive storytelling. My question is just, how do you scale? How do you do out of the workshops? So one of the projects you had like Past Perfect, which for me it's just brilliant. How do you scale it? What are the route to market after the free space of experimentation?
Okay, we're going to have to stop the question. I think we've got it. Ingrid, you've got 1 minute. We've got the flashing red light.
All right. So I think two things. One thing is that we're really clear about managing expectations about what those hackathons can achieve. For us, it's very much about the process, not about the products. A lot of those prototypes that you see don't go any further. And with us, that's actually okay, because so much of that is about filmmakers meeting the technologists and those kinds, because we don't go to the same conferences and we don't tend to talk to each other. So we are trying to sort of form those new collaborations and get used to a new way of working. That's not to say that some of those prototypes aren't, Do Not Track, I'm really hoping is going to go further. The whole point of the Storytelling Innovation Lab was we added some extra days and we were like, we're going to help you get these projects out. But again, connecting the dots between that prototype and then what you do with that prototype and whether you get funding is another step. But we are separating the process from the product, and the process is really important too.
Last word.
And just, very quick 10 seconds from our perspective, but that's very much what we're in the business of doing, trying to put together primetime telly with interactive media so that it's stuff that really sort of scales, has ambition, reach and impact.
Thank you. What a great panel. Well done.